Hello everyone, Simon Jacobson here. We'll be speaking about addiction in quarantine. It's a very painful subject, but a very important one. Addiction is unfortunately and tragically part of the human condition. From the beginning of time, humans, for whatever reason, have become addicted. It could be to substances, it could be to behaviors, psychological addiction, emotional addiction, and physical addiction, alcohol, drugs, sex addiction, gambling addiction, addiction to people, addiction to behavior systems. We're going to be speaking about that and addressing it in a way that hopefully can really be helpful to each of us. But of course, all this gets amplified in a time like now, when we have less so-called escapes, less outlets, whether it's travel, jobs, restaurants, theater, entertainment, sports, and we are compelled to stay indoors or to stay home, lockdown, quarantine, the different words used, then everything that's been going on in our lives gets magnified. If things are beautiful, maybe they get more beautiful, but if things are challenging, especially in the world of addiction, quarantine is its worst enemy. Because now we're even more isolated, can become more depressed, more lonely, and therefore turn to our most comfortable relief, the thing that we're already connected with or attached to, called addiction. So I don't need to elaborate on the problem because I think anyone that's in this situation is quite aware. We want to talk about, obviously, the antidote, the solution. The first thing I want to say on a personal note, you are not alone. We are not alone. Number one is you have tremendous resources that you may not even be aware of within your own soul, within your own spirit. Secondly, we are here for each other. And we know there's a collective synergy, collective power, not just comforting power, but healing power and recovery power, the synergy of more than one person. So we have to break this into two parts. Number one is short-term solutions, and number two is long-term. Now, short-term and long-term are both necessary. When you, for example, bring a patient into a hospital, and they're bleeding, the first thing is you need short-term. You need to stop the bleeding. You need to identify where it's coming from. But then, real healing and recovery comes in the long term, where you figure out what the problem is. You do whatever has to be done on the short term, and then you try to fix it from the root. Basically, the difference between symptomatic medicine and preventive medicine, or symptomatic medicine, remedial medicine, and getting to the root. So short term, I'm not going to focus on much here. That's something that each of us either has to have our support systems, our medical help, whether it's medication or other forms of the meetings we go to, and other forms that keep us going on the short term, who to turn to, your supervisor, a mentor, someone to speak to. And that is obviously goes without saying. It could be elaborated upon, but I want to use the time primarily in the root. But I want to ignore the short term, because if you don't have the short term under control, it's very difficult to fix it from the root. So let's define what is addiction. What is addiction? I mean, the word is rooted in addictus, a Latin word that actually comes from the term devotion, commitment, connection. So let's replace the word addiction with the word attachment. Attachment. Just replace attached to something. I'm attached to a drug. I'm attached to a behavior. I'm attached to pornography. I'm attached to something that is stimulating me and giving me some form of relief, whether it's short-term, longer-term, whether it's destructive, not so destructive. Attachment. When you think of the word attachment, what's the first thing that comes up to mind? What does it bring to mind? You know what it brings to mind? Our first attachments. Where did our first attachments begin? In our mother's womb. For 9 months, you were attached to your mother. You lived in her womb. An umbilical cord feeding you, giving you drink, giving you oxygen, everything you needed. You were completely attached. You didn't even have an independent ego, independent consciousness. Through 9 months, we develop, the fetus develops, we're ready to be born. We come out of our mother's womb, yes, the umbilical cord is cut, but only the physical umbilical cord. Now the child is dependent on the attachment, the hugs, the kisses, the nurturing, the validation, the love of father and mother. And yes, including cradling and nursing, physical touch, emotional touch. Attachments surround us completely, encompass our lives. And it's vital. It's as important, if not more important, than oxygen. Because it's those attachments that give us confidence, that give us security, that counter fears and all the insecurities that will affect our lives as we get older. So what happens? I'm painting the perfect picture, obviously. Healthy parents, healthy attachments, healthy love. So what happens? You know what happens? These attachments start being severed. In the most overt way, abuse, absenteeism, lack of validation, critical parents or critical educators or a critical society. A hostile world begins to the assault on our psyches, on that innocent, pure, defenseless, vulnerable child, impressionable, in need of attachment just like a flower needs water. And instead of getting water, it gets things that are toxic. Or it doesn't get the water, deprived. What happens? These detachments begin to have an impact. We all have resilience. Every child, every life has resilience. But if it's sustained, meaning sustained, the deprivation of attachment is sustained, or actual detachment is sustained, it begins to have an impact. The child begins to question its own value, my value. That is what abuse does. That is what dysfunctionality does. That was anything that is not healthy attachment is like a flower beginning to wither to the fact that it's deprived of nourishment, of attachment. So keep that word in mind, attachment. But we desperately crave attachment, so we're going to look for it elsewhere. And often we'll look for it places that may not be good for us because we're desperate. It's like going in a desert and you're desperately thirsty. You'll drink whatever comes your way. And often there will be the hostile forces, predators and others, some intentional, some not intentional, some not understanding how desperate you may be, and they give you an attachment replacement, a supplement, and you like it because it's filling a tremendous void inside of you, inside of me, inside of each of us, and you start getting attached to it. In direct proportion to the deprivation, to the detachment becomes the attachment, yet now to new entities, to new forces. And again, it could be psychological, physical, emotional. The list goes on. Basically, an addiction, an unhealthy addiction, is an attachment disorder. It's a love that is misplaced. So as we get older, and that void is there, the boredom doesn't help. Quarantine makes it worse. So the attachment is very, very powerful because we're desperate. It's a desperate person seeking to be attached. As a matter of fact, the more loving a person you are, the more creative, the more that attachment energy pulsates within you, the more you're going to be drawn to attachments. So if you think of it that way, then if you want to put the formula in place, we need attachment. To deprive ourselves of attachment is worse than suicide. Because suicide is a one-time thing, God forbid. This is an ongoing deprivation. We need to replace unhealthy attachments with healthy ones. Another way of putting it is, there's a difference between the need for attachment and connection and the object that you look for, that you seek to fill that attachment. That's the key thing to remember. Now, this is not easy. If there was a magic pill, we wouldn't need to be having these discussions. It's not easy because once you're attached to something and it's filling that void, that becomes your habit. That becomes your go-to relief. It's easy. You're late at night. You're alone. You're bored. You're feeling really down. Life is not so predictable. We don't know whether our jobs will last. So what are you going to turn to? You're going to turn to the easiest attachments that you've developed. The ones that you just start browsing on the internet. And of course, the most obvious thing is the number one addiction of all, and maybe more than ever in the quarantine, is sex addiction, porn addiction. It's not about being ashamed of it or being angry at yourself or frustrated. It's dissecting and saying, okay, yes, I am attached to that, but I'm looking for love and I can't find it in the right place. I don't know how to find it. There's nothing wrong with looking for love. There's nothing wrong to wanting to be attached. That's where we began. 9 months we were attached. We need attachment. We need love. Anyone that says I don't need love, I'm fine, I'm a self-contained individual, is full of it. It's not true. It sounds macho. It sounds like a lot of bravado. It's not true. Everybody needs it. And they find it in other ways that are perhaps not so healthy. So the challenge long term is, how do you replace the object of receiving love and attachment from something that is not good for you and replacing it with something that is good for you? The first step is awareness. The awareness of knowing fully well that there is a problem here. If a person does not acknowledge that, then I have to say they're still in denial, and they still convince themselves either that they're not addicted or that the addiction doesn't mean much. They minimize it. So we all know awareness is half the cure, because awareness says, okay, there's an issue here. Now the question is, how do I free myself from the tentacles of an unhealthy attachment? So step one, my friends, find a healthy attachment. Don't fight the addiction right now. I mean, fight it obviously as much as you can. I should rephrase, with the support and so on. I rephrase that entirely. But don't dwell on more than what you're doing. You know what dwell? Find a healthy attachment right now. Tonight, tomorrow, find a healthy attachment. What does that mean? Maybe volunteer to go help some special children online. Get on a phone and call some elderly person. Maybe call a sibling or a relative you haven't spoken to in a while. Reconnect, even with people you've been estranged to. Show gratitude. Just a few examples. These are all soulful, healthy attachments. What is gratitude? Someone did something for you, and you're acknowledging it. You're attaching yourself. You're not saying, oh, I take it for granted, or I don't need to. You are creating a healthy connection. That's another good word, healthy connection. Now you'll say, how is that going to counter the addiction? Remember, attachment is addiction. You're creating a healthy addiction. I don't want to use the word addiction because it's so loaded with something controlling you instead of you controlling it. That's the key. You want to control your attachments, not that they control you. So you initiate. As you develop stronger, healthy attachments, guaranteed it starts weakening the hold of other ones. It's not overnight, and it doesn't take a moment. But you can have to be persistent. Because remember, addictions have a hold on us all the time. As we know, an addict is not just it's not a verb, it's a noun, it's a state of being. It's not just when you're doing it. So you have to counter that with an equal amount of force. An equal amount of force that's at least as strong as the unhealthy attachments. So attaching, volunteer, do it once a week, consistently, the right time. Join another person and say, let's study something together. Let's pray together. I just used some examples. The key is to develop healthy attachments that in turn will begin to give you what you really needed in the first place, that nourishment. And as you become more connected to those, that becomes weaker. At the same time, I reiterate, let's not get cocky. We know we are vulnerable. We know that we're not in control of our lives and that we have in some way surrendered to a higher power, and we turn to others for help. We acknowledge that with full humility. That's, of course, part of it, because you can't suddenly say, oh, I got myself healthy attachments. Very easy to gravitate right back to where we started, because it's become part of our habits and our rituals. Habits and patterns and routines are hard to break. But replace a unhealthy routine, an unhealthy attachment with a healthy attachment. That is a tremendous step toward progress. Now, love in our lives. If you can find, and you should find, someone you can love and loves you in a healthy way, not in a dependent way, not in a codependent way, that, of course, is the ultimate expression of healthy attachment. Because at the end of the day, the attachments that we had in our childhood, the healthy ones that we should have had or had, is about love. An adult deserves love. A child deserves love. In the best scenario, the child receives the love, receives the nurturing. As adults, we seek out and make sure to find a healthy type of partner. You don't want a dysfunctional relationship which will just feed more unhealthy attachments. So finding love, you'll say, well, how do I even begin? I don't know what to look for. So that's why we have objective friends. We have support. We have people we can reach out to and just run things by them. We're all biased, we're all prejudiced, we're all blinded to some extent. What we need to do is recognize our biases, and others will help. Now, we received a bunch of questions today. I just want to address a few of them, which is, one question was, how do you prevent this in the first place, getting addicted? Well, it's like anything. When there's a void and a vacuum, you can imagine it's a breeding ground for problems, as I just elaborated. So the first thing is fill vacuums in your life. Do not let them fester. Do not let them take control over your life. The second thing is healthy attachments. The more you can create them, the earlier on in life, it's a guaranteed formula to be the best preventive medicine. Once a person is already trapped, so the question is, so what do I do? Well, it all comes down to your own integrity. I find very many people in recovery dealing with these challenges, there comes a point, whether it's they hit rock bottom, or there's an awareness, or they really want to get married and build a family, and they realize that they're their own worst enemy. It's very hard to impose that. You can't teach someone to hit rock bottom, so to speak. But this comes down to our own consciousness. The mere fact that you're listening to this, to me, is a very healthy sign. Because people who are in total denial usually don't want to hear anything that shakes up their comfort zone. I think all our comfort zones have been shaken up. So we have now the option to either just say, you know what, I'll just go with the flow, or you have the option to rise to the occasion. I like to believe that each one of you, each one of us, has a better self than we are even aware of. We need to realize that integrity, the power, really the power, the indestructible power of our souls. In times of crisis, you often see it rise. Like they say, people in recovery, or they say this about women, are like tea bags. You don't know how strong they are until you put them into hot water. So if you're in hot water and you feel it, that's when your strengths start emerging. Do not give up on yourself. Make sure you're surrounded by people that affirm your strengths, not people who throw cold water and throw aspersions on every dream and idealistic aspiration you have. Find people that support you, that love you, yet another attachment, and that encourage you. Dream, my friends. Soar. Let your soul soar. Addiction traps it. It's an asphyxiating force that suffocates our ability to fly. That's when you know it's an unhealthy attachment, because it's controlling you and enslaving you. A healthy attachment is the opposite. It's a love and a connection and attachment that frees you, and you want to soar like a bird. So I want to bless you all in this challenging time of quarantine. Remember, the bodies are quarantined. A soul cannot be quarantined. It's our opportunity, it's our gift to reach it, to access that soul, and that comes through, I call a spiritual spa, SPA, study, prayer, and action. 3 necessary, nourishing tools, like a spa, that will nurture and nourish your soul. Study, that's a cognitive conditioning, getting your mind to the cognitive life raft that allows you to see a bigger perspective than your own. You can dream about things that you yourself, and even if one is addicted, you could always dream of a reality of once when you weren't, or a reality where you'll be beyond any form of addiction. P in SPA goes for prayer. That's emotional communication. Emotional communication with your soul, with God, or the God as you understand God. And A is action. After emotional conditioning and cognitive conditioning, action is bringing it down to real, tangible, concrete activities. A good deed, which is, by the way, a connection, another connection. Gratitude, charity, things that are tangible and concrete in this material world. Those 3 forces, the spiritual SPA, SPA, are nurturing and nourishing attachments that will help you grow and become the greatest possible person you can be. I want to thank you for listening, and I appreciate the time. We will be doing more of these live Instagrams and Facebooks and on all the other platforms. Please stay in touch, like, share all the different words used, and give us your feedback. God bless you all.